Jonny now, who's going to tell you about the wonders of Pakistan.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our first ever webinar. I say good afternoon. I should probably be realizing that with this wonderful modern technology, as long as it works and I don't freeze, we're reaching people all over the world. I know that we have some people coming to us from America, so good morning or good lunchtime to you. I know we've got some people in Europe. So good evening, and I think we've even got some people joining us very early on a Wednesday morning in Australia. So good morning to you, and I hope you've got a strong cup of coffee. The great thing about these things is we normally do events, of course, in London or different places, but we only reach a few people. So it's really good to have so many people tuning in to listen about this wonderful country, Pakistan. Now, in a minute, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about my history with the country, how we got started there. As Mike said, I'm the founder of Wild Frontiers, and I founded the company in Pakistan. In fact, the name Wild Frontiers comes after the province of Northwest Frontier. So we're absolutely 100% kind of locked into Pakistan, and it's probably the country that's had the greatest influence on my life. But firstly, let me just quickly say why we think it is adventure travel's best kept secret. The main reason for that, look behind me. This is the most stunning mountain landscapes anywhere in the world. It's where three of the world's greatest mountain ranges collide. So that's the Karakoram, the Hindu Kush, and the Himalayas. It has four of the world's 8,000 meter peaks. It has many 7,000 meter peaks and more 6,000 meter peaks than you can shake a stick at. If you imagine that Europe's highest mountain, Mont Blanc, is 4,800 meters, it gives you some idea of the scale of the mountains that you will witness when you go up into northern Pakistan. It also has a fascinating and extremely deep-rooted history dating all the way back to the Indus civilizations, going through Gandhara Buddhism, Alexander the Great, the Persians, the Mughals, the Sikhs, the British, right up to partition and present day. And of course, with a history like that, it also has an extraordinarily rich culture, which is very visible in elements, for example, like architecture, in the cuisine, and many local customs, which you can experience. It's also home to what I think is probably the most hospitable population I have ever come across. I've traveled in more than 100 countries, and I still think Pakistan is the most hospitable country I've been to. And perhaps most importantly, from an adventure traveler's point of view, there are precious few other international tourists. So you get the place pretty much to yourself, which for my money makes it one of the best adventure travel destinations out there. And I hope that over the course of the next 45 minutes, showing you some lovely pictures and explaining a bit about the country, I will be able to do that. In order to do that, I'm going to talk through one of our most popular tours, our Hindu Kush adventure, which is a tour of the north of the country. I'll touch a little bit on the south as well, but for the purposes of this talk, it's going to be mainly about the north. The Hindu Kush adventure is, of course, a group tour, but please bear in mind that at Wild Frontiers, we're about 50-50 between groups and tailor-made. So if you'd prefer to do your trip on a private basis, we can organize that as well. But before I start to tell you about Pakistan itself, let me just explain a little bit about my own history with the country. And for that, I'm just going to share my screen, which means you won't need to look at me so much anymore. You can look at some nice pictures of Pakistan. So just to take you back, I used to be I suppose what would loosely be called an adventurer. I did 3 big journeys in the 1990s. I rode a motorbike right the way around Africa. I walked through parts of India, Pakistan, and Afghanistan, which of course I'll be talking more about in a minute. And I rode a horse along the Silk Road. The perhaps unusual outcome of the first trip was this book, Running with the Moon. I wasn't expecting to be a travel writer, but I suddenly found myself one, and the publishers thought it was quite successful. So they said, what do you want to do next? And interestingly, I knew in an instant what I wanted to do. I wanted to follow in the footsteps of my 2 heroes from English literature, Peachy Carnahan and Daniel Dravot from Rudyard Kipling's famous short story, the man who would be king. This is a story of two lovable rogues that go wandering off they kind of desert the British army at the end of the 19th century and go wandering off across the Khyber Pass into the Hindu Kush to find this mythical land of Kafiristan. So I grew a beard, I donned a turban, and I followed in their fictional footsteps, which saw me travel from the little kind of branch town of Marwar Junction, where Kipling's story starts, up through Delhi. I hitchhiked up the Grand Trunk Road, crossed the border between Amritsar and Lahore, went up to Peshawar, crossed the Khyber Pass, and headed deep into the Hindu Kush. And this is where I was traveling through. So just to give you a little bit of history here, when Kipling wrote this novella, I think you'd call it, or short story, back in the latter part of the 19th century, there was quite a large pagan land up here in the Hindu Kush, and it was known as Kafiristan, which means land of the unbelievers. And the pagans that lived there were renowned for their warring ways, and they would come screaming down out of the valleys. They would plunder and rape and take back people as slaves back into their mountain lairs. But in 1895, the British decided to demark the border, and that would then give them a clear border between what was British India and Afghanistan. It's called the Durrant Line. It was drawn up by a civil servant called Algernon Durrant. But what was interesting was that it went right through Kafiristan. Now, this gave the Amir, Abdul Rahman, in Afghanistan, the ideal opportunity to send his armies into his part of Kafiristan. And in what was probably the last forced mass conversion in history, he converted all those pagans to Islam, and then renamed the state Nuristan, Land of Light, or Land of the Enlightened. It was a pretty hair-raising journey, I've got to be honest, but after about a month and a half, I came out over the high passes and came down into Pakistan. Now, interestingly, because the border back in 1895 had been drawn right the way through the middle of Kafiristan, it meant that the pagans on the British side were protected by being on the British side. And they still exist today. And they're a fascinating group of people called the Kalash. And I ended up spending 3 months with them to help me form my second book, or write my second book, which was called For a Pagan Song, in the Footsteps of the Man Who Would Be King. But perhaps most importantly on that journey was not the book or even the journey, given how my life has panned out. It was meeting this man, Saifullah Jan. He is the main spokesperson for the Kalash. I stayed with his family for 3 months while researching that book. And it was during that time that he said to me, Johnny, you should start a travel company and bring tourists here. The tourists would really enjoy it. It'd be fascinating for them. And we as the Kalash would gain financially from it. And we don't have many ways of making hard currency. And it would be a great, you scratch our back and we'll scratch yours arrangement. So I thought this sounded like a great idea. And with Saifullah's help, we set about drawing up the first itinerary we ever did. Now, this is our Hindu Kush adventure, and this is the tour that I'm going to talk about. The only real difference between this tour and the one that we did right at the start is we don't any longer go to Peshawar. Now, just to quickly go off track slightly here, some people sent in questions before tonight, and I'm going to try and answer them as we go along. It'd be great to answer some at the end as well, and I can already see 3 questions popping up. But Ken Norman, hi Ken, you asked, is it still possible to drive up the Khyber Pass? The answer to that is no, and that's why we don't go to Peshawar anymore. We kind of stopped going to Peshawar in 2010. We are starting to do it as a tailor-made destination, but we don't go up there now because you can't go to the Khyber Pass. It's still off limits. So what we do is we go to the Swat Valley, we travel up to the Kalash and Chitral, and then along a beautiful mountain road between Mastuj and Gilgit and up to Hunza, and then in the loop back down to Besham. But one more thing I quickly want to touch on before we get into this journey is partition, because that, of course, is one of the major events that, of course, saw the foundation of Pakistan, the 14th of August, 1947. And up until then, it was all part of one country, British India, but of course, with independence, it split. And of course, it's very easy to forget nowadays just how kind of traumatic that period was. Of course, the history behind it was that the Muslim minority were worried that they wouldn't get a fair crack of the whip under a Hindu majority India. So under Muhammad Ali Jinnah, they decided to split the country and partition it. But bizarrely, when you look at it today, it was decided to partition it in two, with a kind of hostile India in between, East Pakistan and West Pakistan. Of course, it didn't work, and in the early 1970s, East Pakistan broke away from West Pakistan and became independent Bangladesh. And it's really been a trauma for all these countries ever since. Pakistan and India have gone to war 3 times, usually over the disputed region of Kashmir. And in my kind of musings, I often wonder what would have happened if India had never been partitioned, what a powerful country it would have been today. The actual trauma of partition was horrendous. One of the great or terrible mass exoduses of people as Muslims moved out of India to go into the Pakistan, and Hindus and Sikhs traveled from what was going to be Pakistan into the mainland India, and up to 1 million people lost their lives in this massive exodus. So let's now carry on and tell you about the routing that this Hindu Kush adventure takes. It starts, like a lot of our trips, in Islamabad. Islamabad is a new city, and like all new cities, it doesn't have a particularly big soul, and it's not a wonderful place for tourists. Why it's good is because it's convenient. British Airways now fly back in there, having stopped flying in there for a decade, which makes it very convenient. And it's just a nice place to kind of get your breath, have a look around. If you can see the right of this picture are the Magala Hills. They're a beautiful kind of lookout point with nice restaurants where you can look down over the twin cities of Islamabad and Rawalpindi and have a nice dinner. The most interesting site, if one can call it that, is the Faisal Mosque, which was given to Pakistan in 1974 by King Faisal. And there are a couple of other nice museums, particularly the Cultural Museum of Lokfersa. But mainly it's a kind of gathering point. We all get together there, and the next day, off you go, up into the mountains. Very quickly out of Islamabad, you're into the foothills of the Hindu Kush, and the Swat Valley is the first place you'll stop. Now, the Swat Valley had a bad reputation a few years ago when it was taken over by the Pakistan Taliban. Of course, it was where Malala was shot, and it was really a pretty lawless place. But the army went in there, brought it back under government control, and it's now perfectly safe. And a second question from Ken was, how much of the Swat Valley is accessible to tourists? Well, all of it is the answer, Ken. You can get right up to Kalam and even beyond and go trekking in the hills beyond that. It's a beautiful part of Pakistan. What it's also famous for is the Swat Valley, is the Gandharan Buddhist era. This is where the Gandharan period stretched from, roughly speaking, 600 BC to 200 AD. And you'll see many of the stupas. There's an amazing site called Takht Bai, which is a ruined monastery, which you can go and see. And this kind of illustrates how big and important the Gandharan period was in Pakistan's history. We stay for the night there at a converted palace, which is now a Serena Hotel, so that's nice. Before continuing on over the Lowari Pass to Chitral. As we travel over the Lowari Pass, we're talking about a 3,000 meter pass. And of course, you'll start to see all the ubiquitous old Bedford trucks all painted up and looking fantastic. We travel around from Deer. We take a minibus to Deer generally, and then you pick up one of these lovely old Willis Jeeps. They were flat packed into Pakistan during the 70s, and they still form a very important part of the transport system. As you can see, they're incredibly robust. The roofs get rolled down, so you get a 180-degree view, and they're just a brilliant way to travel around the mountains. As you come down over the Lowari Pass, you do need to either wear a blindfold or have stiff nerves, because you've got about 45 hairpin bends to get round before you come down into Chitral town. Now, as you can see, Chitral town was surrounded on all sides by high mountain passes. And it wasn't until a few years ago, when the Lowari tunnel opened, that Chitral was cut off from the rest of the country for 6 months of the year. This meant that it developed its very own unique kind of culture, very laid back. People call the Chitralis the flower people, and for good reason. They're a very laid back, independent kind of group of people. And I love it here. This is one of my favorite parts of the trip. As you can see there, Mount Tirich in the background, 7,500 meters. It's the highest mountain in the Hindu Kush, and it permanently backdrops Chitral town. This is the Shah Suja Mosque, which was built in the 1930s. I mean, you have to bear in mind that there's not a lot of tourism here, so you don't get kind of tourist sites. But one of the main places to go and have a look around is the old fort. Now, the Chitral fort is, again, it's not open to the public, but because of our length of knowledge of, and contacts here, we're able to, generally speaking, get in and have a nosy around. The reason why the fort is so famous is because it was part of the Great Game, and there was a famous siege that took place here in 1895. Basically, the old king, Aman ul Mulk, he'd been the ruler for 30 years. He was a supporter of the British. He died, leaving 32 sons. So you can imagine the succession was anything but smooth. The British decided they wanted one person in power. Locals didn't like it, raised an army, and they besieged the fort with about 40 British and Indian soldiers inside. This was just at the time after Gordon of Khartoum had been wiped out. So the British were very nervous about having another disaster on the edge of empire. So they sent 2 relief columns to come and relieve the siege, which they eventually did. One came over the Shandur Pass, brought cannons into Chitral for the first time ever, blasted a few shots off. The besiegers ran away and the siege was relieved. But for a moment there, the empire held its breath. What's really fascinating is that, as I say, it's not open to the public, but inside it's just a litany of all sorts of extraordinary little artifacts from an old royal family. This is one of my favorites. If you can see here the date of the 12th of August, 1947, and it's from the Viceroy, Lord Mountbatten, to the Meta, or King of Chitral, explaining that he's sorry that he won't be able to get up there this year, but he's a bit busy, but he wishes him good hunting anyway. And there's a whole load of other things like the Stars of Garter. There's many, many amazing photographs and things. And it's really through our friendships with the existing or the ancestors of the royals, like Maqsood ul Mulk, who I'm standing next to here, that allows us to get in and see some of these wonderful things. We stay with Maqsood in his amazing house in Ayoum, which has one of the most beautiful rose gardens you are ever likely to see. We'll also see a game of frontier polo, no doubt. This takes place all over the north, and you'll almost certainly see it here, if not in Gilgit or in Skardu. And one of the great myths about traveling in northern Pakistan is the infrastructure. When I started running trips there 22 years ago, it was pretty rough, but since then it's actually become rather good. And there are some lovely hotels along the route. There are some rough ones, I won't lie, where things are a little bit more basic, but you also get some wonderful places like the Hindu Kush Heights, which you can see here, which overlooks Chitral. But from here we head into the Kalash valleys, and these are, as I was explaining at the beginning, the last of the pagan tribes to inhabit the Hindu Kush. When the border was demarked by the British, their lands fell on the British side, which meant they weren't persecuted and forced to change their religion. They carried on their pagan ways, which they still do to this day. They are animistic pagan belief, which means they worship ancestral gods as well as gods of nature. So the honeybee, the goats, they have family gods. They believe in a pure and an impure world. They're often very blonde. They maintain they are from the ancestors of Alexander the Great's armies, a general called Salak Shah, who came through here in about 350 BC. And you can see in certain cases they are very blonde. They celebrate their pagan religion by festivals. They have a spring festival, which is a kind of planting festival. They have a harvest Thanksgiving festival in August, and they have a wine festival in October, and then they have a big festival, which I'll talk about at the end, called Chamos, which is the winter solstice festival. And here the local, the leaders of the community, the Qazis as they're known, or the guardians of the legends, sing songs and tell the Kalash the stories of their ancestry, and they all dance and beat the drums, and they're very inclusive. You will get dragged in to take part in the celebrations. The girls will want to decorate you and make sure that you play a part in it as well. So the Kalash represent one of the great highlights of the trip. And I was asked again, Kate McRae, thank you for your question, Kate, which was a very poignant one given where we're at the moment, which was Kate's been to the Kalash valleys and was asking how they're coping with COVID-19. Thankfully, I'm in touch with people in Chitral and the Kalash almost on a weekly basis. And I'm pleased to say so far, there have been no cases in the whole of Chitral. So no cases in the Kalash. Of course, when we start to go back there, we're going to have to be very careful and put in place certain measures to make sure that we don't take it in there, which will be the case with our trips to a lot of developing world places. But at the moment, it's all good. So from Chitral, the journey kind of takes a swing to the east, and you go up some of the most beautiful roads anywhere in the world as you head from the Hindu Kush towards the Karakoram. I've put a couple of videos in here. The videos may be a little bit jerky for you, but I hope you'll get the sense of what they look like, what the kind of journey is as you travel up here towards the Afghan border. You're going right up towards the Wakhan corridor here as you head up towards the little town called Mastuj. Here we stay at a slightly less salubrious hotel, the PTDC, the Pakistan Tourist Board lodges. They're perfectly okay. They are en suite. They get a burning geyser together to give us hot water. The food's fine, and it's a perfectly okay place to stop for the night before we head on up to the Shandur Pass. Now, the Shandur Pass is a 3,800 meter pass. It's absolutely stunning. It's a flat mountain top pass. So interestingly, it's not your typical pass, which is just a kind of a peak. It's a flat top pass. And this means that every year they are able to have a polo festival there, which is where the teams from Chitral and the teams from Gilgit, which if you imagine kind of, to those of you watching from the UK, a kind of Manchester United against Liverpool, the rivalry is absolutely intense. This is what it looks like. Again, I'm going to show a video. I apologize that it will be a bit juddery, but bear with me if you can. Sorry. So I hope you got the idea of what that looks like. That we do a trip there every year. I think next year's trip, there are 4 places left. So if you want to go on that, get your skates on. But one of the things that I love about the Shandur Pass is the kind of solitary nature of it. And when there's nobody up there, it's every bit as beautiful as when you've got an amazing event like the Shandur Polo Festival. It's great to go for a walk. We leave the jeeps and go walking off the pass down onto the other side where we have a picnic lunch, pick up the jeeps again and head on down towards Gilgit. Now, Gilgit used to be the furthest place in empire for the British Empire, and it used to take a runner, I think, 15 days from the last telegraph place in Srinagar to get to Gilgit, the kind of real outpost of empire. And it's a pretty grim place, if I'm being perfectly honest. You can see it's kind of girdled by a dark range of mountains. I've always felt it's on a bit of a dodgy set of ley lines. But it does have a fabulous hotel where we stay, so you can kind of clean up after the Shandur Pass. And it does have some interesting things to go and see. For example, the Christian graveyard. This is the last resting place for a chap called George Hayward, who was a player of the great game, who in 1870 lost his life, was murdered on the Darkot Pass while mapping the area for the Brits. and a number of other British and Christian people that have lost their life in the area. It's also home to some of the more Gandharan Buddhist artifacts, and amazing to think that that Gandharan era got right up here into the high mountains of the Hindu Kush. But from here we head on up the road towards Hunza, and Hunza is an, if not the ultimate highlight, certainly one of them. Coming around the corner on the Karakoram Highway to see your first 7,000 meter peak, Mount Rakaposhi, which is 7,788 meters, always makes people's jaws hit the floor. It's a truly extraordinary sight, particularly if you've never seen a really high mountain before. We stopped for lunch at a place called the Rakaposhi View Inn, needless to say, and the scene that you can see there, the main picture, is the longest continuous vertical view anywhere on Earth. It's 9 miles from where that group's having lunch all the way to the summit. So that's a pretty cool place. And from there we get to Hunza. And Hunza is renowned as a kind of Shangri-La. It's where James Hilton set Shangri-La and is, where he had Shangri-La, and is a place renowned for the longevity of the people that live there, who often reach 100 years old. It's surrounded by huge mountains, 7,000 meter peaks, and is just one of the most inspiring places you're ever likely to go. Here you can see a group of people that have just walked up from the hotel we stay at to get an evening view of Mount Rakaposhi. It's punctuated by a famous fort, the Baltit Fort, which is, has been renovated about 20 years ago and is a great place to go and look around. You can see that we're getting into, you can see the references to Tibet and the kind of Buddhist architecture. And that's because one of the princesses that married into the Hunza royal family came from Tibet and brought her architects with her. So this is the Baltit Fort, which is, as I say, a wonderful place to go and look around. They've turned it into a really good museum, so it's a nice place to go and see. And then just across the valley with the Hunza River flowing below, you can see there is Altit Fort, which was another little mini kingdom on the other side of the valley, which again, we can go and look around. Here we stay at the Eagle's Nest, which is 500 meters above the valley floor. And if you look at the picture with the beds in it, you can see the view from your window out over the valley. So it's a stunning place. Breakfast on the rooftop. I mean, who could ask for a more extraordinary place to have your breakfast? Great walks, good shopping, actually. This is one of the best places for shopping. In Hunza, in the little village called Karimabad, they have some lovely little boutique shops where you can buy your pashminas or even jewelry up there, and some great things to do. We also travel further north up the Karakoram Highway to this new lake. In 2010, a massive rock slide blocked the Hunza River and formed a 22-kilometer long lake. And we go up there and we have a boat ride, and it's a nice kind of day out. This was the old bridge that used to be there, which attracted a lot of photography. They have kind of rebuilt it a little bit higher up because, of course, the old bridge is now underwater, under a lake, and that's where it is today. We also go to the Hopper Glacier to go and walk on that, so people can get a sense of the glaciers up there. And then we head down the Karakoram Highway. I'm again going to show a little video. I hope you can see it okay.
About an hour south of Gilgit, you're going to stop here at the confluence of the Indus and Gilgit rivers. It's the point at which 3 of the world's great mountain ranges collide. To my west, you have the Hindu Kush. To the north, you have the Karakoram, and to the east and south, you have the Himalayas. Indeed, standing in front of me now is the gigantic form of Mount Nanga Parbat, the peak of which stands at 8,125 meters above sea level. And it's the Nanga Parbat Massif that represents the very western end of the Himalayas.
So you can see this is, you know, that's an amazing geographical point where these mountain ranges collide. And then, of course, there's the Karakoram Highway. Don't expect the kind of, you know, a huge motorway. It is vastly improved, actually, over the last few years. But it's a single-lane road, or a 2-lane road that takes you back down towards Besham and then Islamabad. Now, I'm just going to talk about some extensions to that, because a lot of people will like to see a little bit more. So first of all, on that route coming down the Karakoram Highway, you come to Fairy Meadows, which is sits in the lee of Mount Nanga Parbat, as I've just said there, 8,124 meters high. You can stay in the log cabins. I wouldn't say they're super luxury, but they are perfectly acceptable. And from there, if you spend 2 nights, you can go for a really nice walk up to one of the base camps. You can travel across the Dosai Plateau, which is a 4,000 meter high plateau, which is only available for about 3 months of the year, on your way to Skardu in the region of Baltistan. This is now getting very close to the Indian state of Ladakh. You're getting very, very close up towards Ladakh, and you can see a kind of similar mountain desert landscape. There's a lovely old bazaar in Skardu. You'll get to see a game of polo, and you can see, again, remnants of the old Gandharan period. What's really cool about this part is that there's also some fabulous accommodation. The Serena chain has taken over a couple of palaces, old palaces, and renovated them and turned them into some beautiful hotels. This is Kaplu Palace. I think it's one of the most gorgeous hotels in the world, quite honestly. And it's been done really well, and therefore offers a very kind of high level of accommodation. From here, we often go up the Hunza Valley, at the end of which lies what's called the Gondagora La, which leads you over into Concordia and the base camp for K2. The Wild Frontiers Foundation set up in 2009, and in 2010 we did a trek to K2 and raised about £20,000 and built our first school up there, which our clients love to go and see and meet the children. So that's another really nice thing to do. And all of that, the Hindu Kush Adventure and all those extensions is available on a trip we do called the Summer Mountain Festival Explorer Trip. Bit of a mouthful, but it goes in June, July and August and has a duration of 22 days. So if you've got a bit more time, then that trip really does cover off the whole of northern Pakistan. Lahore, as an extension again, is an amazing city. I mean, a city with such a deep-rooted history. It has, in my opinion, the most beautiful mosque in the world, in the Wazir Khan Mosque. It has a fascinating old bazaar. It's got remnants of the British time, of course. It's got the fort that you can go and look around, which was the seat of power, not just for the Mughals, but also for the Sikhs and used by the British. And it has the Badshahi Mosque, which is beautiful in day and night, which is pretty much a mirror image of the one you may have seen in Delhi, the Jama Masjid there. Also Food Street, which is a great place to go in the evening. Loads and loads of really nice cafes, all cooking stuff outdoors. There's a place called Cuckoo's Den, which is my favorite, where you go right up to the top of the building, an open top rooftop restaurant, and you can have dinner looking at that site. I took that photograph while having dinner in Cuckoo's Den, so it's a stunning place to be. And of course, kind of finishing off that part of it is the somewhat Python-esque and rather strange closing of the gate ceremony that takes place every evening at 4 o'clock in Wagah border between India and Pakistan, where they both try to outdo themselves with the most extraordinary walking and butting up against each other. As you can see in the photograph in the middle, quite a lot of people in the Indian side. I've always felt the Pakistan side is a better side to see it because you don't get so many people there. So just quickly to talk about other tours, we do a southern Pakistan trip. I was wondering whether 2020 was going to be the first year since 2003 that we wouldn't run a trip to Pakistan, but no matter what happens with COVID, that's not going to be the case because we had a very successful journey through the Indus Valley back in February that went. This is a trip through the cultural highlights of the Indus Valley and the ancient kind of Pakistan. You get to see many UNESCO World Heritage Sites, such as at Mohenjo-daro, at Ut Sharif, Bahawalpur, and the Derawar Fort. That area is very close to Jaisalmer in Rajasthan, and the Bahawalpur Fort is very similar. So if you know Jaisalmer, you'll know that sort of area. Multan is a fascinating city, the city of Sufis, and Harappa. These are all some great cultural sites. So that's a wonderful trip. It runs February and November, obviously when the temperatures are a bit lower, 12 days, and we now finish it in Lahore. So that's a very interesting, very different kind of trip to Pakistan. The Karakoram Adventure, this is one of our top trips. Everyone loves this in terms of a massive road journey. It starts in Kashgar in China, runs all the way down the Karakoram Highway over the famous Kunjarab Pass, down through Islamabad to Lahore, crosses the border to Amritsar, where you visit the Golden Temple, and then up to Srinagar, where you finish on the houseboats in Srinagar. We have another trip called Along the Pamir and Karakoram Highway, which takes in Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, China, and Pakistan, which is epic road journey again. The Pamir Highway, of course, through the Pamir Mountains to Kashgar, and then a similar journey that I just explained on the Karakoram Highway. And then perhaps one of our most off the charts kind of trip is Under a Pagan Moon, where you go up to the Kalash valleys to experience their most lively festival of Chalmos, which takes place every winter solstice. So it runs the trip from, roughly speaking, about the 10th of December to about the 20th of December. And you go there, and it's just when the Kalash are enjoying their most outrageous party time. They're renowned for making wine, which they make from their grapes, and then they drink or consume quite a bit of it during this festival. And they have 5 days where they purify the valley and have night dancing. We have to kind of dress up and purify ourselves. We dance around the fire at night. It's where when you're really in you're in a pagan land, you're kind of jumping out of the pages of National Geographic. What's also cool at that time of year is that you can go up into Chitral Gul and see the famous markhor, which are the wild antelopes that live up there. And if you're very lucky, as I was a few years back, get to see the snow leopards that come and prey on them. I took that photograph watching the snow leopard all afternoon stalk its prey and make a kill towards dusk. It was a great thrill to see a snow leopard in the wild. Finally, I just wanted to touch on, where Pakistan sits. Obviously, one of the reasons why it's kind of ignored by so many travelers is because people are concerned about the safety levels in Pakistan. Well, I'm pleased to say that they are improving. They've been improving for a long time, and things are changing there. For a start, you have Imran Khan as the Prime Minister. He came to power a couple of years ago and is at heart a liberal man. British Airways resumed their flights there about a year ago and have been flying in since June last year, and we now use those flights to get into Pakistan, once they restart again, of course. The visa situation has improved radically. It's now an online e-visa application, which makes life much easier. There were some teething problems to begin with, but now that's improved radically. And the FCO advice, which has become less stringent and has kind of changed over the last 5 years to become a lot easier for people to travel there. And just going to give you a little clip from the British High Commissioner who made this clip in November last year.
Thanks to improvements in the security situation, the UK has changed its travel advice for Pakistan. Among other changes, the advice now allows for travel by road to the north of the country. This builds on a successful visit of the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge and the return of British Airways. It is great credit to the hard work of the government of Pakistan to improve security. I myself am excited to visit more of Pakistan, and I'm delighted that British nationals will be able to see more of what Pakistan has to offer.
So there you go, not just from me, but from the High Commissioner of Pakistan. And of course, for the Brits, it was pretty extraordinary when, certainly for me, I was absolutely amazed when I saw Prince William and Kate go up to, not just go to Pakistan and visit, Islamabad and do some dining and stuff there, but to actually go up all the way to the Hindu Kush and visit the Kalash. This was extraordinary. They also went right up to the Borogil Pass and went up there. So that's a pretty amazing change. And with all this improved security and stuff has come a lot of interest from the British press, where you have articles featured in the Sunday Times, British Airways High Life, the Daily Telegraph, and even I was asked to write an article for the Daily Telegraph about the improved security situation in Pakistan. So there you have it. as you can see, my passion for Pakistan runs deep. I've been traveling there. Mike said more times than I can remember. I'm actually not sure it's more times than I can remember. I love it every time I go, and I like nothing more than traveling up there, taking a group of travelers with me and kind of sharing what is a kind of home from home, and introducing new people to my friends up there, and introducing them to these amazing landscapes. It feels like giving a present to people. I love it so much. So that's my talk on Pakistan. And I would like to ask Mike to kind of come back in and see whether we've got any questions.
Thanks, Johnny. That was great. And we've had some really good questions coming in. Similar question from Brendan and Eleanor. Brendan asks, when are we likely to restart trips to Pakistan? And Eleanor asks, do we think the September 2020 trip will still run?
Okay, so I had a chat with my friends in Pakistan about a week ago, and they are still hopeful that September and October trips might run. I slightly worry that that's more optimistic than realistic, but I think if they can, we will be running them. And you know, there are so many imponderables on that. There's the British governments, there's flights, there's all sorts of things. But I think from a Pakistani point of view, they're fairly confident that they will be able to get those trips going. So inshallah, as our Muslim friends would say, let's hope so. But if not, we have plenty of trips for next year. All I would say to people looking to book trips to Pakistan for next year is, and this is not me being disingenuous, I promise, you need to probably book up pretty fast, because what you have to remember is that a lot of people have moved from this year to next year. And so, for example, the Spring Festival trips are already sold out. I know there's only 4 places left on a couple of the summer trips. And the autumn trips, if they don't go in September and October, will of course fill up with people who we need to move across. So just bear that in mind. Answer to the question, I really hope so, but yeah, it's hard for me to know for sure.
Fingers crossed. So Barbara would like to know if there's a dress code for female travellers.
Great question. The short answer to that is not really, but at Wild Frontiers, we always like to you know, be cognizant of the culture and the way people expect us to look. Therefore, I say no shorts on men or women. My kind of general rule is north of Delhi, don't wear shorts. But it's pretty loose. I mean, what women are expected to wear, say certainly if you were in Lahore, is a loose veil and sleeves that come down to probably halfway down your arm. Whoops, if you can see, halfway down your arm, and obviously trousers that come down to halfway down between your knee and your ankle, something like that. When you're traveling around the north, it's useful to just have a kind of veil, a scarf that you can pull up over your head if you need to, but it's very rare that you'll have to do that. So it's fairly easy. It's not like, say, Iran, where there's a slightly more draconian dress code. It's fairly liberal.
Great. Jeff is booked for next year, and he's imagining his mobile phone won't work, and is wondering about the possibility of renting a satellite phone. Is it necessary, and is it even allowed?
No, it's so not necessary, Jeff. I mean, my friends in the Kalash valleys call me on their mobile phones every day. I don't think they've got many other people to speak to on their mobile phones, so they call me up. So no, mobile phones will work virtually everywhere. The only places where we might run out of signal is when you're right on top of the Shandur Pass. But aside from that, and maybe a few little pockets aside from that, no, you definitely don't need a satellite phone. We always used to send our guides with satellite phones, and if you go to, you know, K2 or you do a trek up there, then you probably do. But on one of these more normal trips, no satellite phones required. Okay.
Great. And Tricia would like to know whether one can get a beer in Pakistan these days.
Yeah, that's a very good question. The short answer, well, it's a complicated one to answer that, because technically, yes, there are liquor outlets in Islamabad and Rawalpindi where you have to show you're a Christian, and you can then get beer and whiskey from what's called the Murray Brewery. It's not the best whiskey or beer you'll ever drink, but you can, but it's all a bit of a flaff. So the best way to do it if you want to have alcohol is to bring it with you. Be subtle about it, but bring it with you. The one place where you can buy beer, although it's extortionately expensive, is up in Hunza, where they get it, it comes down the Karakoram Highway from China, and you can buy cans of beer there. But the other way to look at it is a detox couple of weeks, like one has to do in Iran. I've got one question, Mike, which I see from Howard Darban. Hi, Howard. Sorry, I missed your question when I was in the Kalash. Howard and Hazel traveled with me a long time ago now into Pakistan, and we had one of the most extraordinary trips where we got caught out in a massive snowstorm, and the roads were blocked. It was absolute chaos. We just managed to get out of the Kalash valleys in time, and were holed up at the Hindu Kush Heights for about 4 days before having to get back down to Islamabad. But Howard spent a lovely time with the Kalash, took some great photographs, if I remember, and he's asking me whether the lifestyle of the Kalash has changed over the period of these last 15 years. The answer to that, Howard, is really not very much. And in fact, I often think that the culture of the Kalash is almost stronger today in some ways than it was. There are more Kalash for a start, you know, with healthcare and better healthcare, less infants die, therefore the Kalash, there are more of them. In the low point in the 1970s, there were down to about 2,500. Now there's nearly 5,000, so that's good. When you go to their festivals, they're very passionate about it. They're very proud of their religion, and they really love these festivals. So, and they still adhere to all the cultural elements of their religion that they always used to. So, I remember when I first went up there 25 years ago, in 1996, some journalist said to me they'll be gone in 10 years. They haven't, they're not, and I think their culture is still as strong as ever.
Great. A number of people have visited Pakistan before, and we're asking that kind of question in particular about whether there's an update on the school in Baligon and whether that's still going.
Yeah, I mean, the really good news about the school in Baligon, I'll be very honest here. We built the school and we employed a teacher and we got the whole thing going. But what we found, given that it was in about as remote a location as one could possibly try and run a school, it was incredibly hard to run it ourselves. We tried for years with some success, but not total success. And so what we did at the beginning, towards the end of last year, is that we handed over the running of the school to a local educational trust. Excuse me. They've taken it over. They are now running it. They supply the teachers. They do the repairs. We pay them a certain amount of money through the foundation every year to help facilitate that. But that's the really good news, is that means that you know, the education the children will be getting, the facilities that they'll get will be that much better because we've handed on the responsibility of actually running it to a local organization. So yes, absolutely, they still go there. Our groups still go there, and it's still it's a highlight of the trip.
Great. Tim would like to know, prior to COVID, did the Foreign Office permit you to go to the areas that we're talking about here, or do you need special travel insurance?
Good question. As you've just seen from the High Commissioner, the travel advice has become better, but there are still 1 or 2 pockets where on this trip you will probably contravene Foreign Office advice. So when you travel between, so they've taken away the advice against the Kalash. The only areas where you can contravene Foreign Office advice is when you drive between the Swat Valley and Chitral over the Lahore Pass, but you do that in a matter of, you know, 8 hours. Or if you drive coming back down the Karakoram Highway around Chilas, there's an area where you contravene Foreign Office advice. So best bet is, yes, you do need insurance that allows you to contravene Foreign Office advice, but we have that with our travel and general insurance, or Campbell Irvine is another insurer that will allow you to do that. And it's not that much more than standard travel insurance.
Okay. And Den has asked whether altitude sickness is a problem.
It never is. Sorry, was that Dan or Den?
Den.
Den, sorry, Den. It never is. It used to be a little bit of a problem when the road between Chitral and Gilgit was really bad, and we used to have to camp for the night on the Shandur Pass. And there you're camping at 3,400 meters, something like that. And every now and again, we did have a couple of people that would get altitude sickness. But because you're now just driving over that or walking and coming down the other side and picking up and spending your night at a much lower altitude, there's nowhere really on this trip where you get altitude sickness. We've never had it. The only place you're actually sleeping anywhere near altitude sickness levels is in Hunza, where you've got the view behind me from the Hindu Kush Heights. That's 2,900 meters, but by that stage, you're already 12, 13 days into the trip and therefore well acclimatized. So no, altitude sickness should not be a problem.
Okay, and along similar lines, Susie's wondering how physical these trips are and whether there's a lot of climbing involved.
Good question. No is the answer. They're not. This is what we would call a Jeep safari. Now, I wouldn't want to give the impression that there's no walking because, I think walking in these areas is absolutely stunning, and that's what a lot of people want to do. And of course, you want to have a bit of exercise when you're going on these kind of trips. But all the walks are optional, and you still get to see all these amazing places just by going in the Jeep. So no, they're not. They're tiring in the sense that you're traveling at a reasonably high altitude on some, some of the roads are pretty iffy, and, the accommodation is varied. So I'm not saying that they're not kind of quite tiring trips, but the physicality of it in terms of trekking and that sort of thing, no, very limited indeed. And all the walks, as I say, which are kind of, morning walks, afternoon walks, day walks, are all optional. And a lot of the time people bow out of them. And for example, in the Kalash valleys, you just stay in the Kalash and you have one of Saifullah's sons or daughters takes you around to a house to go and have a cup of tea with one of their mates. And, it's that sort of thing. So no, not a problem.
Okay. Alison is wondering, we mentioned Imran Khan, but there are problems with the borders between Pakistan, India and China. And does this impact our trips at all?
Sorry, I mean, okay, if the question is, does the somewhat iffy relationship between India and Pakistan affect these trips? The answer is generally no. Of course, if India and Pakistan really go to loggerheads, then they might do. But in all my years of running trips here, I've never had to cancel or reroute a trip because of a potential fallout between India and Pakistan. As we saw at the beginning of last year, Imran Khan was actually very quick to hand that pilot back and defuse the situation, and it all calmed down pretty quickly. The question you ask about the India and Chinese border, well, that's a very interesting one. And of course, that has nothing to do with Pakistan and doesn't affect the Pakistan trips. But right up there in northern India, that was a fairly nasty situation. It seems to have died down again a bit now, but yeah, that was an odd one and something we'll be monitoring more for our trips to Ladakh than our trips to Pakistan.
Great, and I think we've just got one more question from Philip, who asks, are Americans allowed?
Oh, 100%, yes, absolutely. I've taken lots of Americans to Pakistan, and they love having you there. It's yeah, it's the Pakistanis, one of the things that I've noticed over my years running trips to all kinds of different destinations is that the perception of these places is often very different from the reality when you're on the ground. Americans are as welcome as Brits because we're travelers. They have a very good understanding of the fact that governments are governments and people are people. And they accept us as the people that we are, that we're interested in their culture and their country and their cuisine and their landscapes, and they're delighted to have us there, particularly countries like Pakistan, which don't see many tourists. They're thankful, to be perfectly honest, that we're traveling there and spending our money there and are interested in their culture. So no problem at all for Americans. And I could put you in touch with some Americans that I've taken there if you'd like me to, so they can tell you what it's like. But no problem at all.
Actually, I must squeeze one more question in because a couple of people have asked. Dawn and Vittorio have both asked what the local food is like.
Well, it's delicious, but and I think the easiest way to describe it is imagine your Indian takeaway, because most Indian food, most Pakistani food is actually, oh sorry, most North Indian food that you get in an Indian takeaway is actually Pakistani food. So it's Rogan Joshes, it's chana masalas, it's jalfrezis, it's those classic kind of North Indian dishes. When you get up to the Northwest Frontier and Chitral, there are local variants which are delicious, made of kind of apricots and walnuts, aubergines. They do some fabulous dishes, great breads, of course. So, you know, I wouldn't say it's the most varied cuisine, but it is delicious. And you do have some kind of fascinating local areas. So when you get to Hunza, you start getting noodles and things like that, which of course is coming from China. So you get a lot of influences. But if you, as a general rule of thumb, if you think of, you know, your Indian takeaway or your Indian restaurant, that is generally speaking serving what would now be Pakistani food. Great.
Well, thanks very much. Thanks everyone for joining us. I hope you found that inspiring and enlightening. And the world of travel may seem a million miles away at the moment, but believe it or not, things are slowly opening up, as we've seen with the airbridge announcements. And in fact, Pakistan next year is looking quite busy because many people have had to postpone from this year to next. So do take a look at our website for trips for 2021. And of course, booking a trip at the moment can seem something of a commitment, but from tomorrow, July the 1st, we're launching a month of £25 deposits for our group and private trips. So that will hopefully help you make that commitment. We also have our COVID promise, which basically means that if your trip is not possible due to coronavirus reasons, you're able to transfer for free or obtain a full refund. We'll be sending you an email tomorrow with all of these details and details of our next talk, which is going to be Secrets of the Silk Road on Wednesday, the 15th of July. And we'd love to see you there. That will be Jonny and Mark, another colleague from Wild Frontiers, and they'll be talking about the stands and the wonderful journeys you can do throughout that region.